Hi, everyone, and welcome to part one of this month's 3P seminar series, brought to you by the Cure Parkinson's Trust, the Van Andel Institute, and the World Parkinson Coalition. My name is Neil Chatterjee. I am a former 3P alum and starting my fifth year of graduate school at Rush University in Chicago, Illinois. And it's an absolute pleasure to be hosting today's very special patient-led session of 3P seminars as part of this week's Clinical Research Week at 3P Seminars. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I wanted to inform everyone to register for the upcoming Grand Challenges in Parkinson's Disease and Rallying to the Challenge Conference hosted by the Van Andel Institute and the Cure Parkinson's Trust, which will be held virtually on September 23rd through the 25th. This year's conference program focuses on when and how PD starts, so be sure to register and tune in for that for what is surely to be an extremely promising session. Secondly, I wanted to inform any new attendees of the 3P seminar series of the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. If at any point during today's presentation or discussion you would like to raise a topic of discussion or ask a question, please use that form and then we'll get to those questions at the end of the session. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presentation speakers, two phenomenal patient advocates, Ben Stecher and Hugh Johnston. And today the title of their talk will be The Brain Gym, a Neurotherapy Center. And with that, I'll let Ben take it away.
All right, thank you, Neil. Hi, everybody. My name is Benjamin Stecher. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada. And I'm joined by my, I don't know what you want to call yourself, but Hugh Johnston, who's the chair of the Toronto Western Hospital's Movement Disorder Clinic Patient Advisory Board. Hi, Hugh. How you doing today?
How you doing, Ben? Good friend of mine. How's that?
Yeah, we'll go with that. Why not?
We'll go with that.
All right, let's get started. Let's see if I can share my screen properly. All right, so we should be able to begin now. Okay. So I'm going to be introducing to everybody today a concept that we lovingly call here the Brain Gym, a neurotherapy center. Now, this concept was born out of a conclusion that me and Hugh came to, and I think a lot of people come to it at some point along the way in their journey. And it's a little bit of a unsettling conclusion, but essentially stems from a problem that I encountered once I got to know the research community a little bit better, and once I got to understand some of the science behind Parkinson's disease. And that conclusion was broadly this. Simply, medical science doesn't look like it's going to have an answer to this problem called Parkinson's disease anytime soon. And that's particularly problematic for people like me who have Parkinson's disease, because we need to figure out what we're going to do about this disease in the meantime. Now, while we still hold out a lot of hope, and well, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic for the future of therapies to come, there's challenges that we face every single day that we need to deal with. So we as patients try to find new solutions to these problems. However, before I go into those, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the reasons why I might be a little bit pessimistic about medical science's ability to intervene in a time frame that's relevant for a lot of patients that have already been diagnosed. And there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm just going to broadly go over some of the ones that I think are the most important and the most relevant. And one that I think a lot of you might be familiar with is we simply don't have a great understanding of what biology itself is. There's a question that I often ask researchers when I meet them, and that is, if our collective journey to understand biology were a 100-yard dash, how far have we come on this race? And there's one answer in particular that I really like. It's from a guy named Dario Alessi, and he said this to me. Generally, I think we understand less than 1/10,000th of all that there is to understand in biology. We know virtually nothing about how biology is controlled and how it works. There isn't a lot of funding to do the fundamental research on one gene or one protein that would be needed to really understand these things. Funding bodies want us to solve diseases and work with companies to figure out shortcuts that can be made into a drug. But we don't have the fundamental basis that is needed to really solve these problems. Now, that fundamental problem is very much acute to people like me who are hoping that medical science will be able to intervene in a time frame relevant to patients. However, it's hard to have too much faith in that process, given how little we actually understand about the fundamental pieces that drive our biology and drive this disease forward. Another of those fundamental challenges came to me from Dr. John Harding, who said to me this. Once you've got two or more variables, it becomes incredibly hard to work out what is important. Everything we do is dependent upon solving one variable at a time, which is very inefficient. No one has come up with a better way yet. So essentially, the way medical science works is that we try to isolate one independent variable at a time and tweak it to see its effects. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that deep within my brain, there's far more than one thing going wrong at any given time. So again, it just gives me pause in having too much faith in this system that's built upon isolating one independent variable at a time. Now I look at the pipeline of therapies in development. This is from a great paper that was just released in the Journal of Parkinson's from Kevin McFarling, Susan Buff, Gary Rathlov, Thea Domini, Richard Weiss, and Simon Stott, which really laid out the entire pipeline of clinical therapies in development. And while there's a lot of optimism there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about that some of these therapies will strike gold in the near future, I'm not so optimistic about the disease-modifying therapies in particular. For some of those reasons that I just pointed to before, I don't have a lot of faith that a lot of them will actually translate into something useful in any time frame that's relevant for a lot of patients already diagnosed. A lot of that has to do also with the time lag that it takes to actually bring these therapies into the clinic. So at best, even if therapy, let's say a new therapy were to come online that had a lot of promise and a lot of potential, it would take somewhere from 12 to 18 years for that to actually make it into the homes of patients, and for patients to actually start deriving a lot of use from that new chemical entity. So this lag, there's just a huge lag in how long it takes for a therapy to actually make its way from the bench to the clinic. Another reason why this is complicated, and another primary reason why I'm not exactly confident that one of these therapies will come online soon that will help a lot of us, is that we treat everyone as if they have the same disease. And I'm going to borrow a quote from a book that just came out by two guys named Alberto Espe and Benjamin Stecher called Brain Fables. And that quote is this: almost everything we know about this disease comes from studies into groups of people. Those people get plotted as dots on a graph. A line then gets drawn through the middle of the group, reflecting the group's average. That average becomes the result of the study. An average that almost none of the dots falls on. And to illustrate that point, here's a comical looking graph. But this is how a lot of medical science works. We lump a lot of people together into one study, and then we derive an average that tries to represent all of those people. However, none of those individuals fall neatly on that average. And another point that I want to make, and I want to hand this over to Hugh to kind of drive this point home, is this one. Check the OR. Hugh, what do I mean by check the OR?
You need to understand the odds ratio and the hazard ratio you're looking at. Think about it this way. If the lifetime risk of Parkinson's disease is somewhere between, 3 and 6%, depending on what you look at, and the odds ratio is 1.3 in the study you're looking at, that's 1.3 times a small number. Is that really important or relevant? Now, if you come to me with an odds ratio of 2, now I start to get interested. 5, now we're talking. Over 10, yeah, okay, now we got something that really has a high chance of being a causal link. When we look at a lot of the research, what they are doing in some of the data is they're just increasing the sample sizes. They're getting that confidence interval up and away from 1.0, and as soon as it's above that, they've got a factor with an odds ratio. Who cares? 1.25, 1.1, 1.34. I don't know what that's going to do for us, but anyway.
Yeah, and for fans of Toronto 90s hip hop, you might recognize the song Check the OR as well. I'd recommend checking that out at some point as well. But anyways, to drive this point home a little bit further, this problem is going to be escalating pretty rapidly in the future to come. Not only are the amount of people that are diagnosed going to be growing almost exponentially, it seems, but the burden on society is growing rapidly as well. I mean, just in the United States alone, it's estimated that per year it costs $53 billion to the American economy, just this one disease alone. Hugh, did you have something you wanted to add to?
Yeah, and when you look at these numbers, there's a high probability they're very much understated.
Yeah. So that's all to say that time is our enemy. For people diagnosed with this disease, we don't have the luxury of waiting. While we try to be as patient as we can be, and we try to be as hopeful as we can be in the therapies to come, we can't rely on them solely. We have to take matters into our own hands. And first, something that needs to be driven home is that this is very much a fatal diagnosis for a lot of people, especially for young onset individuals. This is not something that we have the luxury of being able to say, oh, we'll just live with it and time will pass us by and then we can wait for a cure to come.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ben, that the statistics, people seem to think that Parkinson's is something you die with. And if all you got to do is dig into any of the malignant types, any of the Parkinson's plus syndromes, and any YOPD, anyone who gets the disease before age 64, and it's not a pretty sight.
No, it's not. So what do we do about that? What solutions can we look to? Well, a radical idea that might not seem so radical is why don't we just try focusing more on what we know works. Anybody who lives with this disease knows that there are certain things that they can do on a daily basis or even on a moment-to-moment basis that helps them better manage their symptoms. I wish, and something that I think the Parkinson's community in general wishes, is that there was more focus and more attention paid to these strategies that we know help people live better on a day-to-day basis. Trying to figure out why and how we can optimize these these strategies that people use to live better lives. And that's going to be the focus of our talk today. Trying to develop this kind of comprehensive neurotherapy centers designed to optimize everything that we know about brain health. At the moment, patients get 20 minutes every 6 months, generally with their neurologist. Just enough time to go through a battery of weird motor tests before they're given a prescription and then off they go. However, there's so much more that goes into this disease than just the medication. Every moment of every day really depends on a wide variety of factors that patients are constantly tweaking to try to ensure that they live as good a life as they possibly can. In addition to just these comprehensive neurotherapy centers that are designed to optimize all these various nodes, we need interdisciplinary care teams as well. And this is something that I think me and Hugh are very proud to be a part of helping develop here in Toronto, where the Movement Disorder Center here is really focusing now on trying to build these interdisciplinary care teams. And Hugh, I don't know if you want to say more about the patient advisory board or even the interdisciplinary care unit that's being developed here.
Yeah, we have some folks that have tried this out in functional neurological disorders and using an integrated model where the team actually gets together. They don't hand off the patient one to each other for their own therapies. They actually treat the patient as one, and they treat what the patient needs instead of treating the disease. That's a bit of a weird statement, but it actually means something.
Yeah, and a key part of this is that they're all working in unison together to focus on one individual patient at a time. Now, that might not be practical in a lot of areas, but that's what we fundamentally think needs to be done to optimize care for each individual person. So now we're going to be looking at some of those individual things that patients need that help drive us forward. And kind of underlying a lot of this is this idea that we need to start capturing more individual data on individual patients, doing more N-of-1 studies. Now, N-of-1 studies have been poo-pooed for a long time, and it is hard to derive a lot of broad sweeping conclusions from them. But I mean, talk to any patient, they'll tell you personal stories about times where they felt a great benefit from something that they tweaked in their daily regimen. There is something to be learned from these studies, and something that I think we can learn to apply broadly if we took a more methodological approach to studying these N-of-1 cases.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're dismissively called as outliers as well in the community. But again, that's a bit dismissive. I think that there is a lot of valuable information to be gleaned from those cases and those individuals. And I'm going to start by showing a couple of videos from my own background. So this is one that I think a lot of people have seen before. It's a video of me playing basketball. And while this, and I'll mute it just so Hamlet was very upset with his father. But I don't know exactly why it works, but I think it has something to do with sensory feedback systems in our bodies. And you'll see it once I start picking up a basketball. Every time I touch that basketball, every time it rebounds back into my hand, I feel almost a reset in my motor symptoms and my ability to control my body properly. It's not just my hand as well. It permeates throughout my whole body. I don't know exactly what it is, but something about dribbling that basketball restores my motor functions to a really amazing degree. Another one that sorry, Hugh, you wanted to say something?
No, go ahead.
And then the other one that I wanted to show, this one is more novel, I don't think anyone has seen this before, is that I feel the same thing when I swim. This is me swimming completely off my medication.
So Ben, if all the neurons are dying and gone, how can you do that?
Well, Hugh, I don't know. And what's striking to me is that nobody really knows. We don't have any great answers for why this works so effectively. But just from a very unscientific of what I feel like is happening. What I feel like is happening is that every time I feel it's something about that constant sensory feedback that I get from the water, from my skin constantly touching and pushing against the water with every stroke, allows me to kind of reset the cortical systems in my brain that enable me to move smoothly and fluidly. If we could tap into that ability somehow so that I don't have to be in a pool the whole time to feel normal, I think we could do a lot to help a lot of people.
Yeah, so Ben and I were talking about this one day outside of that pool, and Ben was telling me that when he does the duck test and you get the declination, once he starts to slow down, if he claps his hands, he speeds up again. Same thing. There's something in the behavior and how the brain works, and we don't understand it, but it does work.
Yes, and I'm going to throw this over to Hugh now to carry on from here to talk now about HIIT training. Take it away.
All right, then. So thank you very much, Ben. A lot of people have talked about Parkinson's and exercise. There are a number of papers out there that talk about exercise being one of the very few disease-modifying treatments that there is in this disease. And when I say disease-modifying, that means it would extend your lifespan beyond what it would be otherwise. And, oh, by the way, your quality of life is better. And so if you think of rock steady boxing or just HIIT training on a bike, which is you do something for 20, 30 seconds, very intense, break, stop, do it again, 20, 30 seconds, really tucker yourself out, and you can get a big benefit from fitness on this. There's a picture here of a BBC Two program Horizon where they took apart the science of HIIT training, and it's a pretty interesting one as well, and I encourage you all to have a look at that one. Ben?
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to add on that. So there's some interesting work coming out of the Cleveland Clinic from Jay Albert's lab about forced cadence, especially using these new bike machines that they've developed that they're getting a patent for and that they're hoping to be able to mass produce soon. But something about that forced cadence is really beneficial as well.
Yeah, it's the forcing. Then strength and flexibility. You know, if you've got rigidity, flexibility is going to matter. Your hamstrings get all tight. People can't can't do this with their arms, whatever the case might be. And you can rehab this. We have an example here of Christine from Arequipa in Peru, who very much changed her ability to function through exercise. And we have all sorts of people that we call outliers sometimes, but they're not really outliers. They're just people doing this kind of therapy and work, and they're in great shape relative to other Parkinson's patients at their same age. What's interesting about them, though, when you talk to them, is if they get out of their routine and they don't do the right things, they slide back. And so it's not so much a matter of, well, these people really, have a mild form of Parkinson's. No. They get the real deal, but they're dealing with it through the therapy. Ben?
Yeah, and motivation plays a huge role in this as well. I mean, it takes a lot to garner up the energy to do this every single day. That's when those dismissive labels become very detrimental, because a lot of people don't understand the true benefit that can be had from these kinds of activities.
Yep.
Come on. Here we go.
Create a new pathway. You know, here's an interesting thing. Pam Quinn at the PD Movement Lab talks about relearning to walk like a baby, and how you can use those strategies to actually get yourself going again if you freeze. What is dance? It's not something that you're born doing. It's not an automatic movement. I don't know about you, Ben. Tango is not something that I do. And so create a new movement that you didn't do normally. And once you wire it in and make it repetitive, you can make that into an automatic movement. And I'll give you a great example is I can play guitar in ways that I could never play a guitar before. And I have automatic movements, and I have great proprioception. I know where that hand is in space because I've practiced this unnatural movement. But boy, when I started, I was the biggest spaz you ever saw on that fretboard. And so you can wire in new movements into your brain, and you can do it even after you get Parkinson's disease. Ben?
Yeah, just to add, if we ever took a tango class together, I'm sure there'd be a lot of crashing to the ground.
Yep. Gait, step length, stance, and pace. Oh man, I gotta tell you, this is an interesting one. You can see a picture of me there, the back end of me, and I've got a harness on. Let's have a look at this video. Here's this patient, and very bradykinetic, and look at him. All he needed to do was pick up his leg and put it out there. What's that all about? And so this walking and gait and stance and pace, they put me on this split belt treadmill at Toronto Western Hospital. And one side, my right side, the step was shorter than the other side. And so what did they do? They got me to have a longer step, and it basically put my gait back together. Look at these patients here. They're doing things that should not be possible. If the neurons are dead, please explain to me how people can do these things. How can people who are not able to move then move in a direction, for example, that's different than what they would normally automatically move in? There's all sorts of classic examples of this. People start running. I've seen Ben, to beat freezing, when he goes near a doorway, he'll start to run, and in through the doorway he goes. This should not be able to happen if there are no neurons left. There's something going on here we don't understand. And so one of the things that people, look at that, off they go, can't move, and we really do need to understand how these things work. And so what can we do for patients so that they can automatically have larger steps and be able to walk normally? Because they could certainly do it when they're running or when they're doing other activities. And it may be as simple as taking a physiotherapy approach to it and dealing with some of the fears that are involved. Here's another example. Again, this patient just gets on a bicycle, and so people make up a story, and the story is, oh, well, biking must not be as complex as walking. And it's just like, I'm sorry. Like, there's something going on here that we don't understand, and it's not paradoxical movement. It's a real thing happening in people's brains, and we need to understand it. Ben?
Yeah, getting back to, not to be not to make too much of self-promotion of this, but a lot of what we found when in writing this book is that so much of our labels that we've created, even the label of Parkinson's disease to begin with, is just a man-made fiction in a lot of different ways. And Hugh just pointed out another term that we use these terms to kind of paint, to plaster over these problems in some ways, these paradoxical movements that they're often called. But, and then the diagnosis is made, and then people say, oh, they did their job, they can move on to the next patient of some sort. But
Yep.
a lot more needs to be done to understand these things. And one
Look
trick
at
that
this
patients
guy.
often use.
Look at that guy. His balance is there. The ability is there, but we're not leveraging it. Sorry, Ben.
No, one trick that often gets used, and something that maybe we can try to take advantage of, is if patients who have a lot of gait problems and who have walking problems, imagine kicking a ball before they take their step. It helps tremendously. So there's some other pathways that we can tap into that combine a lot of the movements that we have learned over time, but we just don't know quite how to go about doing so.
Okay, next slide, Ben.
Move on. This video is interesting, but we got more to do.
Yeah.
Balance perturbations.
Balance perturbations. Hit your bouncy castle there, will you? I did this yesterday, actually. I went on the subway to go downtown to the hospital to visit somebody, and there was hardly anybody on it. You could shoot a cannon through the place. And so I did subway surfing. I just let go of everything, and I let the balance perturbations jostle me around, and it helped me with the work on my balance. Frankly, I'm a sailor. I've seen sailors at 82 years old that have the balance of a 60-year-old. Why? Because they're walking around on wobbly docks all the time, and they're walking on wobbly boats. A BOSU is your friend. If you're in the gym, you might be able to go surfing. This trampoline thing is something I absolutely have to try, not only because it's great for balance, but your sensory input, Ben, has got to be really great when you're doing that, is it?
Oh yeah, and there's the weird thing about this one, why this one was so much more beneficial than all the others, and I really have to give a lot of credit to Josefa Dominguez in Portugal for kind of inventing the system, is that this one had a real lasting benefit throughout the day. I mean, I felt this one, it lasted me almost throughout the entire day. I could feel the benefits derived from this kind of training. I wish it was available all over the place, but it's really a brilliant thing that she's put together.
Ben doing lightsabers. Okay, next slide.
Yeah.
So freezing in fear. I was talking to somebody who has to use a walker now. They're in their mid-40s. And they said to me, but when I go to the summer house, I don't need my walker. And I scratched my head and I thought, that's weird. And then they said to me, but at the summer house, if I go on the gravel road, I need my walker. And I said, well, why do you do it on the gravel road, not the grass? Oh, I don't have to worry about falling down on the grass. That's a fascinating thing, isn't it? You ever hear of blind sight? People who are blind but then don't run into things because their visual pathways are connected to their amygdala, not through the visual cortex. And so there's very much a fear component that happens in the brain when you come into a freezing moment. When Parkinson's patients try to turn a corner, they don't use consistent strategies, and their brain recognizes that. When you do a shuffle, what are you doing? I always thought a shuffle was a diabetes symptom, frankly, because their nerve endings in their feet get shot from the diabetes, and they don't know where they are in space, and so they walk on ice. So how much are these fear pathways in the brain involved? And you could take somebody who can't walk, and if you just get them to swing their leg, swing their arms a bit, and hold on to them and start them off walking, away they go. How does that happen? It's fascinating. These things work. Ben?
Yeah, I don't know if this is entirely relevant, but I'm reminded of a neuroscientist whose book I read years ago. His name is V.S. Ramachandran, who actually has been diagnosed with some form of Parkinsonism himself. But he's the one that basically deciphered phantom limb syndrome and came up with a therapy for phantom limb syndrome. Now, prior to it, people would have thought that those people were crazy. What do you mean you have a phantom limb? That it's often for amputees that have had a limb blown off, yet they still feel sensory input coming from that limb. He found, using mirrors and a bunch of other techniques, a way of rehabbing that. I wonder, or I hope that there might be something like that available for people who have these kinds of freezing episodes as well.
So I had a great chat with our lead on physiotherapy, and that's exactly what they do for functional neurological disorders. They show them a mirror and they use those same types of therapy. And the whole idea of proprioception, not knowing where your body is in space because your sensory systems aren't working as well for one reason or another, and trying to overcome that by showing with the mirror where your body is in space. It's really fascinating. Next slide. So Inattention, we just signed off on a letter supporting a DBS study that was associated with this concept in science of Parkinson's, that inattention and executive function are actually involved in movement. And not only that, that they are frontal cortex activities, and that the Parkinson's patients don't seem to fall when they're paying attention, like going up and down stairs. They seem to fall, as you can see with the head divot picture here, when they're on the flats, when they're not paying attention. I was speaking with a 25-year Parkinson's patient who had DBS about 12 years ago, and they were telling me they were falling twice a day in their home, but never outside, absolutely never. And why would that be? Well, it might be that in the home, they're so used to everything, they don't really pay as much attention. And so this whole idea of multitasking and trying to do too many things at once, younger people can do it because their brain automatically puts more attention to where the risk of the fall is, whereas Parkinson's patients, we're not so good at that, and we lose some function. Ben?
No, yeah, I got nothing to add to that one. That was
Hey, there you go, good. All right, so the next one is nutrition and hydration. There are a few vitamins and minerals that can be affected by medications. It's good to know if you're short on any of those. Protein, everybody knows that protein competes with levodopa for uptake, and so the timing of your protein meals really matters. As Ben said to me one day, I could have a big steak and I'd be off for about 6 hours. And there are medications that people take, the Parkinson's patients take, that are not good to take with certain foods and other supplements because they bind the same enzymes, particularly for elimination, and you can overdose on certain medications as a result. And so just getting Parkinson's patients to think through how they're doing, lots of high fiber, lots of fluids and water. People forget to drink, people forget to breathe, people forget all sorts of things. They're busy and away they go. Ben?
Yeah, this really speaks to the value of adding a nutritionist to that kind of interdisciplinary care team, because ultimately what I think is that this is going to come down to individually tailored nutritional regimens. Right now we have these broad label terms like Mediterranean diet as being the best for people with Parkinson's disease. But I mean, it strikes me that almost all those studies were done on Europeans. So how do we know that that's the best for the vast majority of people that are diagnosed with Parkinson's? And I mean, there's so much individuality that comes from, like, each one of us has a different microbiome, a different genetic pool of indicators that break down lipids in various ways. I mean, it's so individualized. I mean, we have to have individual treatments that can optimize this.
Yeah. And if I could make an R with my hands, I would, but I don't know how to make an R. OR. Look up the OR on these things, folks. Mediterranean diet. I'll bet you $5 it's less than 1.5. Swallowing and pneumonia. How do you die from Parkinson's? You fall and you get complications of falls, and you get aspirated pneumonia. So when does this happen? Well, this is late stage Parkinson's, isn't it? No. you can go for a swallowing study when you're fairly early on, and they can find dysfunction. You will have bradykinesia in the motility, in the movement of the food and liquid down your esophagus. You will lose sensation of food on the back of your tongue. There's all sorts of things that happen to you, and the therapies for these are right out of the kit they use for stroke patients. And a speech therapist is your friend when it comes to Parkinson's disease. Part of the problem for Parkinson's patients is they don't develop any of these good habits and make them automatic as when they're eating and drinking until they have a very serious problem with it, as opposed to early on. Ben?
Yeah, there's definitely a point at which a speech pathologist and a speech therapist is almost more important than your neurologist in keeping you alive and healthy.
Yep. And speaking of speech pathologists, there's this whole idea of loud and big and let's do a choir. And you know what? Guess what? They kind of work. They actually do. You can learn to enunciate your words. If you lose function in walking and you learn to make bigger steps, you do the exact same thing with your mouth and your tongue and your vocal cords. And you know what? The most important part of any speech, and anybody who's ever done any theater knows, it's all in the diaphragm. When you breathe, you have to breathe from your belly. You have to breathe in and then breathe out. I can take a patient who's had Parkinson's for over 20 years, and by simply getting them to focus and concentrate on how they're breathing and their diction, they can go from being slurred and soft to loud enough to hear just fine and with pretty good diction. So how can that be? That can be because we haven't taken the time to do the proper physiotherapy to make these things automatic. Go to any exercise class, you'll do some A, E, I, O, U's, and then you're done. You have to do the therapy and treatment with a purpose. You need to learn a reason, have a problem you're trying to solve, and then learn how to solve it, and then make it more automatic so that you're not having to think about it all the time. Ben?
I got nothing to add to that one. That was perfect.
So stress and anxiety. Well, the neuropsychiatric symptoms are a big component of Parkinson's disease, and I'm not going to go into any of the medical part of these diseases and what's needed to that, but from the brain gym point of view, talking to people in group settings about what they're doing in their lives to have lower stress and less anxiety is a very good thing for Parkinson's disease. There's lots of literature out there on how stress does impact the symptoms of the patients. There are all sorts of different ways you can do the Tao, you can do autogenic training. The NHS has a nice video on that in the UK. Cognitive behavior therapy is a highly effective treatment for people with stress and anxiety that is very much exacerbated by cognitive distortions in how they're thinking. And if you develop anxiety, depression, apathy, and anhedonia associated with Parkinson's disease, and you're medicating for those, cognitive therapy is going to do you a lot of good. And then I'll leave the last to the great Andrew Lees, has been on a bit of a journey. Ben, can you tell us about what Andrew's up to?
So he's experimenting with all sorts of psychedelics in the Amazon jungle, from what I gather anyways. And we don't have a lot of time left, so I won't go too deeply into that. But I do want to say one other thing, that a backup plan of my own that I that I have in case everything else goes wrong is to go run off and live in a Buddhist temple somewhere, because if I were able to live in a meditative state, Parkinson's would not be much of a problem for me.
Fascinating. Next slide, please. Sleep is important. Boy, I can trace a good day to whether I slept well or a bad day. And this is important in a lot of different brain diseases, whatever they are. The Parkinson's patients could develop REM sleep behavior disorder, and they could develop sleep apnea as well. And these are important problems for patients, because they don't sleep well, and so they're not functioning as well day to day in their life, and they're not able to get the most out of their lives. Ben?
Yeah, just to say that there's some great studies going on into this in Montreal, looking at RBD and the effects, the overall effects, and then trying to track it. It might be a possible prodromal symptom of Parkinson's, but we have a lot to learn about that.
Or is Parkinson's a symptom of RBD disease?
Possibly. And here's one that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on. And I wish I could see the people in attendance, but I wanted to ask people to raise their hands if possible. How many people know of the connection between functional neurological disorders and Parkinson's? I, and Hugh as well, often ask I think we know some pretty well-educated people with Parkinson's, and very few of them really appreciate the connection that there is between FNDs and PDs. And yep. Hugh, I don't know if you wanted to just throw it to Alfonso at this point.
Okay, so who's this guy we're going to hear from? This is Alfonso Fasano. Alfonso is the head of neurological surgery research at the Toronto Western Hospital. He's Mr. Advanced Therapies, DBS, but he's talking here about functional neurological disorders. And we were talking to Patient Advisory Board just a week ago, and Alfonso's comment was to the question, do functional disorders tag along for the ride with organic patients? And the answer was, oh, do they ever. So Alfonso, let's get him to explain what they are then.
Functional tremor means that the patient has a tremor that is caused by a functional etiology. Just imagine that the brain is a computer. You may have either a problem with the hardware, meaning that something is broken in the computer itself, or you may have a problem with the software. So in functional tremor, the brain, the neurons, everything is fine. So the hardware is okay. It's a problem with the software. So there is some malfunctioning in the circuitries of the brain, and this is why we call it functional. And this is why, in theory, a person with a functional disorder potentially can become disease-free. But this doesn't mean that these patients don't have a disease. These people suffer exactly like all the others. They are not making this up. It's not malingering. Malingering is a very well-known condition where the patient on purpose mimics a condition. For instance, when you want to have reimbursement from insurance, or you don't want to work, this kind of thing. There are researchers thinking today that this is somehow related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And it can be the consequence of an old trauma. Sometimes in the history of people with functional disorders, there is an history of sexual abuse, of physical abuse during childhood. In some other cases, there is no problem, no history of any trauma whatsoever. And this
let's stop.
I recommend you go and
have a look. And so these used to be called psychogenic disorders, and in movement disorders, they're really not. There's a software problem in the brain going on. And a vast majority of the people don't have a trigger that's some sort of trauma or anything like that. So what happens with these patients is, for example, if you try to entrain a Parkinson's patient, you can't. If their tremor is a certain hertz on one side, it's the same on the other side. But with a functional tremor, you can actually change the amplitude and the timing of the tremor through your diagnostic processes. With Parkinson's, if you distract somebody and give them something really hard to do while they're making a movement, their tremor will get worse. Whereas with a functional patient, the tremor actually might get better or might even go away. And so there are positive symptoms that are associated with functional neurological disorders. And as you can see, there is a vast group of them. And boy, are there ever a lot of Parkinson's related symptoms on that list, eh, Ben?
Oh yeah, I just want to add that I think every PD clinic needs to have some FND specialists in it going forward.
Yep.
But we're running low on time, so let's move on.
This is why it's very difficult.
Hey, so education is important. The Brain Gym will have education, teaching people to advocate for themselves and perhaps advocate for others, managing chronic disease because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Some of the basics in the biology of how things work, because when people understand things, they're more likely to stick with the treatments, and understanding the physiology of how things work. If I understand why a wide stance and a bigger step keeps me from having small steps and freezing, then I'm more likely to do the therapy and do the booster shots that I need to keep it going. Ben?
Yep. Now, the big problem with all of this, though, is how do we get this to everybody? Can we really design centers in every location and outfit them with everything that they need for patients to derive the most benefit from all of them? Because, I mean, an optimal center would have to be easy access to large populations of people in an attractive location and be able to accommodate a range of budgets as well. While that would be a great solution, I'm not sure that's practical for everybody, especially for some parts of the world that don't even have access to levodopa, let alone neurologists and movement disorder specialists. So this would very much be a luxury for some people. While I think it would be a great solution for those who can afford it, it's not for everybody. So what we need to do is this: bring all of this into people's homes. This is very much what I think a branch of everything that we're doing should be focused on this, which is outfitting each patient with the equipment, methods, wearables, and access to all the tools and software that they need to be able to derive as much benefit as possible from all of these different things. I mean, everything that we've gone over today in the ideal brain gym is something that we could be able to bring into people's homes at some point. And I'm starting to work with a few software development teams that are trying to gamify cognitive tasks and gamify some of these exercise modalities as well. But I wish that there was more people working on trying to just bring all of these different skills and tricks that people pick up along the way into people's homes so that we can derive as much benefit from them as possible. Hugh, anything you wanted to add before we throw it to Q&A? You're muted, Hugh. Hugh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think these things work. We've seen outliers using all of these types of strategies. The dosing is often a problem, and the lack of attention and focus on one specific problem to turn it into more of an automatic restoration of function and then moving to the next symptom to work on are perhaps two of the key things that we see don't happen as often.
Yeah. And for the last word, I'll give it to, the last thing I want to say, there's a bet that I want to make to the science community, and that is that if we were able to actually develop the brain gym at home and bring it into everyone's houses, I think, anyways, it would do more good than almost all of the disease-modifying therapies that we currently have in development. So if anybody wants to take me up on that bet, I'd be happy to wager whatever you want. But yeah, that's the bet that I want to make to the research community. And with that, I'll leave the final word to the great Muhammad Ali. The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road, long before I dance under those lights. And with that, I'll say thank you, and now we'll take questions, or I'll throw it back to Neil now.
Ben has a soft spot for Muhammad Ali.
Well, thank you, Ben and Hugh, for what's a really, really invigorating discussion about some of the things that people with Parkinson's have done to help modulate their own disease course, but potentially some lessons that the research community can take and potentially move into the clinic for the benefit of everyone. Just to kick things off with question and answer, you know, both of you have mentioned individual activities that you've engaged in that help the course of your own movement disorders. And Ben, you had mentioned that even something like the trampolining activity, you feel the effects pretty latently throughout the course of the day. Do you notice that if you participate in those same kind of events over the course of time multiple times, so you trampoline one day and then the next day, do you feel any additive effects to the latency of when you feel that benefit? And the same question goes to you, Hugh.
So I haven't had enough access to those trampoline facilities to really be able to do the experiment. I imagine there would be, it feels like there would be, but I can't say with any definitive certitude that there would be. But I mean, I do feel it from basketball, I would say. If I do those basketball drills day in, day out, time and time again, I do feel an additive benefit.
Hugh, do you
Yeah,
feel
the
the same
same
way with
here. If
sailing?
I'm,
Obviously, you're pretty practiced, yeah.
yeah, sailing's the same way. I can get on a sailboat and do an outrageous amount of exercise and activity and completely forget my meds, and I'm fine for the most part. And so whether I'm playing a guitar or I'm practicing those big steps and getting my feet apart, it's the repetition that really for me is pulling in. And we've got some folks that if they don't do what they normally do and they stop sleeping right and they don't do their proper exercise they do, and if they miss a med here or there, they basically fall apart over a period of time. And they can restore it, they can get it going again, but
And there are day-to-day things as well, that like little habits that you pick up along the way that also help, I would say. I wonder, again, I wish I could see people's faces, but if you see a person with Parkinson's pulling on their big toe, for instance, what is it that they're trying to do? For most, they're trying to get rid of the dystonia that's affecting them at that moment.
Yeah.
So all sorts of little tricks along the way as well that people pick up.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, let's dig into some of the questions from our viewing audience. The first question is from Rune Viet. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but Ben, you had mentioned pretty early about that 12 to 18-year timeline, and so Rune mentions that 12 to 18 years is not the same time frame for developing COVID-19 vaccine. Why is that the case?
Well, we just don't have the same kind of urgency that we have about Parkinson's disease. And that's something that the book Ending Parkinson's Disease tried to do, is just to push that sense of urgency in the community, that this is an impending problem that's going to be affecting a lot of people and that it's something that we need to do something about. But frankly, it's just not something we've done a good job of advocating for yet. We don't have that kind of drive in the general public, or that kind of fear, at least, that this is coming and that this is something that we need to deal with.
Great. John Smith, maybe this is a shout out to the PD Avengers, but John Smith asks, is there a network of PD patients? And could you please mention some resources on patient organizations, communication channels, peer support groups? Thank you.
Ben, you take that one. You know more of them than I do.
So if you want some online groups, I'd go first and foremost to the Parkinson's Research Interest Group on Facebook. It's probably the best one out there for getting updates on the latest research and for some wide-ranging discussions on some of the problems that we face. PD Avengers is another great one. It's an advocacy group started by Larry here in Vancouver, who now is the host of the Michael J. Fox podcast. There's also, in every local community, there's one as well. Some of the best ones are often found around some of these boxing programs, especially Rock Steady Boxing. But if you also just reach out to me personally afterwards, I can help steer you in the right direction. Tell me where you are, and I might know some people in your neighborhood that might be able to help.
Great. Rune asked another question to Hugh. Hugh, you had mentioned that our neurons are gone, or the neurons are gone. What do you mean by the neurons are gone? Lack of dopamine?
Yeah, so there's this presumption, or hypothesis or theory, we'll let the scientists pick which it is, that the neurons die in the substantia nigra, and we prove it because there's no neuromelanin left. And I've seen slides go up by great researchers and showing that by the year 10, there's just no neuromelanin left at all for the most part. But how do these people still move? And how do they still move when they're off? And, okay, well, if they're on and they move, perhaps it's the dopamine receptors that are still around, but the dopamine creating neurons are gone. But when you're off, where are you getting your dopamine from? And so that's a really interesting question. So then we sat down, Ben and I, we had dinner with a bunch of leading scientists one night, and we actually asked them, did you ever count the neurons? And the best we got was, at the time, yeah, we think people have counted samples of the neurons in the basal ganglia and then extrapolated. But I'd be curious, has anybody ever seen a study where they actually go into a Parkinson's patient and prove that the neurons are gone, as opposed to using some staining technique or neuromelanin as a proxy?
Neil, you might be able to answer that question better than we can, because I think some of the best work has come from your lab, Jeffrey Cordauer's lab. I don't know what insights you can say about that.
Yeah, Ben, part of the issue to address what Hugh's been talking about is a lot of them are still estimations. We're using stereological estimations as an appropriation for how many neurons we're seeing in an individual area of the brain. And so the actual raw number of neurons that we're counting in the substantia nigra, for example, is still an estimation that we're using for the sake of some semblance of time, not to count every single section from the entire rostrocaudal extent of a brain region. And so, yeah, that knowledge is a little in gap, but it's the best practice that we have to comparing whether something is different from another sample that we're looking at. But that's a great question. The actual raw number of estimated neurons in the substantia nigra can vary from study to study. So it is something that is a little bit lost in the ether of translational medicine. But yeah, we definitely, stereology is a time-consuming activity in the first place.
Yeah, and Neil, it was Jeffrey's slides with the neuromelon that I was actually referring to.
Yeah, and Jeff has shown for several years that even with the idea of striatal dopamine, or the level of striatal dopamine, the degeneration at the level of the striatum prior to that of which you see down the line, this dying back mechanism, is something that makes the timeline of intervention for PD patients even more troubling in some cases, and knowing when you can rescue the level of the caudate and putaminal dopamine supply versus the neurons that are actually feeding that supply into the striatum in the first place. I want to make sure that we get to a couple other questions. John Smith had an interesting question. It's been known for decades that goal-directed voluntary movement can ameliorate some PD tremors completely. And the PD issue, to speak to the functional and neurological disorder component to it, is within brain circuitry as much as degeneration. Why do you think we're still unable to translate this old knowledge into psych clinic and help patients? For example, training to use these circuits for everyday life when performing any task as if you are playing basketball.
Yeah, go Ben, this is a good one.
I would say in general, maybe this is an unfair characterization, but maybe, I don't know, Neil, if he wants to pick up on this as well. There's a reluctancy, or maybe there's even an ethical consideration to bringing patients into the lab and doing the kind of experiments that might need to be done. Now, obviously, we don't want to be drilling holes in anybody and implanting the electrodes or implanting sensors that might be needed that we can do in rats or in other animal models. But we must be able to do more than we're currently doing with real live living human beings with this disease. But there does seem to be that hesitancy to actually, one, there's probably a cost associated as well. It's probably a lot more expensive. There might be ethical considerations like I mentioned, but I feel like there's a general reluctancy to bring patients into the lab as well and do experiments on individual patients.
Yeah, if you could find a patient that could come in full time for, a couple months, come and hang out with you. The hard part that is the researcher then has to do it full time and can't do all the other stuff that they do as well.
Yeah,
hopefully through this we might inspire some people to do a PhD or a postdoc where they study this full time.
Yeah, I think these are great points, and I think this will help stimulate a lot of conversations for ways that we can adapt our current training models and start incorporating some of these principles into more of our scientific endeavors. For the sake of time, I will say that we're going to need to cut off the question and answer for now. I'd like to give a huge thanks to our speakers, Ben and Hugh, for what's really been a fascinating talk, and hopefully this will trigger more discussions on how to potentially tap into these mechanisms. For all the questions that we didn't get to, we'll keep the discussion going. We'll post these questions on both Facebook and Twitter if you would like to follow along and add on to the discussion on social media. And with that, I would like to also make sure to remind everyone that our next 3P seminar session is this week. So you get more 3P seminars within the same week itself. August 27th on Thursday, we'll have a session with a special focus on early career researchers conducting clinical research. So be sure to register for that. There's still some spots available. Hope you can all make it to that. Once again, thanks to Ben and Hugh. Thank you to the Van Andel Institute, the Cure Parkinson Trust, and the World Parkinson Coalition again for bringing us the 3P seminar series. we've all been extremely grateful and appreciative of the information that it's brought to light and the conversations that it's started. And thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you all on Thursday.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's pretty great. It was just fantastic you were here.